Shalom and welcome to this edition of Revealing the Truth, where we cover the headlines, the heartlines, and biblical truth. I'm your host, the Reverend Rabbi Eric Walker, and we're visiting with Michelle Ferrigno Warren, the author of the newly released book, The Power of Proximity, Moving Beyond Awareness to Action, from our good friends at IVP Press. Michelle, welcome to the program.
Thank you so much for having me. It's good to be here.
Well, we're delighted. Michelle is the Advocacy and Strategic Engagement Director for the Christian Community Development Association. She's an Immigration, Education, and Human Service Policy Specialist and Adjunct Faculty at Denver Seminary. Michelle is a founding staff member of Open Door Ministries, and she and her family live in an immigrant neighborhood in Denver. You didn't always live in the heart of or the proximity to an immigrant community. Where did you grow up?
I grew up in a typical white suburban community. I was in the tri-state area back in the East Coast and then halfway through high school in Colorado, but pretty much everybody looked like my family, same socioeconomic status, race, etc.
Okay, and raised in the church?
Raised in the church. I was definitely raised in the church. I went to Bible churches my whole life. I was even not just in church Sunday morning, Sunday night, Wednesday night, but I also went to a private Christian school that started the year I was in kindergarten, but I started in first grade and was educated in Christian school, first grade through 12th, and then went to Cedarville University, then Cedarville College for college. Wonderful.
So you were immersed in the Bible even as a child. Was there any point in which you kind of had a challenge of faith or began to explore the world outside of the scope of the Bible?
I haven't actually. No. I'm going to say pretty much I've been immersed in the Bible, and while there's always opportunities in your growing and maturing to filter what you know to be truth through your experiences through those lenses, what I guess I've come full circle, but no, I never had like this real wandering away where I explored and followed other religions and took them on as my own. But I definitely had a lot of personal growth experiences that would challenge the very essence of, is God good? Is the Bible true? Is faith real? But that was not, yes, definitely had some of those in college, I think pretty typical, but nothing that would question the truth of the Bible for a long period of time.
Understood. How has it been? You have 3 children, correct?
I do. They're not so much children anymore, but yes, I have given birth to 3 kids.
Okay. And as you were raising them, did you get this clarion call to move into this community with the kids, or was this after the kids were grown?
So basically, after I graduated from college and got married shortly, when I moved into our first community alongside the poor and started teaching in city public schools that were right by a project. So we lived in Section 8 housing and then I taught right a couple miles away. So our kids didn't come until a few years later, and then of course we have 3 of them, 21, 19, and 15, and this has just been our life to live in an immigrant community, to attend and be on staff with a predominantly homeless church. And it's just our chosen place, or the place that God called us to live and have the opportunity to grow and mature in Him alongside people who were different.
Very, very interesting approach to things. Now, what was it like for your kids being surrounded by kids who weren't like them?
Yeah, I think they didn't know any different. I've seen people, move context, even not just with people in different races, but I think the older and more established you are, the more internal choices and external choices you have to make to be able to assimilate well. Our kids didn't know anything different. It wasn't until they college that, I think that's very typical to begin to explore who you are, but it was the first time that they had to really recognize their racial identity for sure. But yeah, definitely not something that was different or uncomfortable or unfamiliar with them because it had always been their life.
Right. What is the makeup of the community? Hispanic, Indian, ethnically diverse?
Yeah. So it is definitely more of a multicultural community. Most of my neighbors and kids in school, alongside my children, and T-ball and all those different things that happen in a neighborhood is predominantly Mexican American, or Mexican rather. But it's a lot. Our church is a very multicultural church, and there used to be, before gentrification really impacted it, it's predominantly African American, but that has definitely changed, and I would say many nations, African, as well as Indian and Latino, different groups of people from Central and South America, and then white, of course, as well. Denver's a pretty white city.
It is a very large city. Were your parents involved in ministry or very active in the church growing up?
So my parents we were Catholic, and my parents left the Catholic Church and started going to a Bible church when I was around kindergarten age. My dad is an engineer and my mom is a nurse, and so no, they never had any, never did ministry full time, but always felt, and it could be their Catholic upbringing. I mean, you're very committed to your mission, to community service, and Catholic social teaching cares a lot about outreach and the poor. So I think that they brought that into who they were in the church, and so it wasn't that hard for them to believe that we would care for the poor, because they, of course, were very involved in their local church. But it was predominantly, like I said, very homogenous. But yeah, my parents were a part of our church and served in the gifts that they had.
What are your kids doing now?
2 of them are in college and one's in high school. I've got one child studying international political economy and Chinese, and just came back from a fellowship at Princeton. And then I have another, my son is actually in DC right now at the McCain Institute doing an internship, but wants to be a public defender. And then my 15-year-old is ready to start his sophomore year in another couple weeks.
So school goes back there and after Labor Day, or?
It goes mid-August.
August. Okay. School started here today, where we
All
are
right.
in the South. So
Okay.
it's been a quite a busy day traffic-wise, and everybody getting situated where they're supposed to be. For you and David, what have been the biggest challenges for you, or has this been pretty much a seamless transition? It was a vision that the Lord gave you to do this, and He kind of cleared the path, set you two on a course, and you don't look back, or do you?
Oh, I think that's kind of funny. It's been a 24-year journey. It wasn't like some impromptu decision that we made and all was well. I think anybody who is going to look at their first 24 years of marriage or a life would say none of those, whether they're familiar or otherwise, are seamless. There's always ups and downs, just with life and being proximate to the poor. I don't have 2 lives to compare it to. I've spent more of my life in this community, my adult life, living alongside the poor, than I did in my previous, upbringing and life. So no, nothing's seamless. I think, like I said, there's just natural ups and downs of life. I think there were obviously challenges along the way. Would we ever fit in? I remember at one point feeling like I was so deep in, I couldn't go back, because I had been changed so much, and that if I went back, there would be always a sense of grief and loss. So I know those are some of the transitions as well, but I think the challenge is trying to expand your culture to include everybody, instead of just close off and exchange one culture for another. And so that is always the challenge.
You talk in the book, you reference privilege a couple different times.
To keep your feet planted where you are, but not forget. Yes, would you like me to speak about privilege, or a little bit about the book? Or?
Well, I'd like you to talk about privilege, because you came from I would assume a middle-class background, with having the benefits of college and clothes and food and a nice roof over your head, and you went to a private school. So you had to have this vision based on either role models or a specific calling or an influence on you to take privilege and put it on the shelf to replace it with hands and feet of service, which is in the model of Jesus' statement that says, I didn't come to be served, I came to serve. And that is not the privileged attitude. The privileged attitude is I did not come to serve, I came to be served. And so it's the opposite of privilege. It's the suspension or the releasing of privilege and taking on humanity, which is not privileged.
Yeah. Well, you asked me if I had a role model, and obviously Christ. That's the whole idea of the beginning of Philippians, where Paul talks about that Christ emptied himself of all of his privilege, of his nobility, of his power, and took on flesh and came very, very close and near to those of us who are in need. So if I'm going to take a role model, obviously I'm going to take Jesus Christ himself. The concept of living and sharing life alongside the poor should not be radical for the church. This should be just an obedience. And I think there's a little grief in that it would be an anomaly. This isn't really a story just to project, what I've done, but really to challenge the church to follow Christ in what he has done, which is to empty himself of all of his rights and, what somebody might owe him as being God himself. And if God can empty himself to serve the broken, to serve the vulnerable, to eat with the outcast, then we as Christians are to follow his example. This isn't my call, this is his call to enter into a life of service with him, and this is where we're going to find ourselves. I truly believe that.
Well, I couldn't agree with you more. What does your husband do? Does he work alongside of you in the ministry, or is he...
Definitely. So my husband, actually, this was all, the Lord had really stirred in his heart before we were married that he wanted to plant or be a part of a church in the heart of a city and a poor community. And when we were dating, I was getting to enter into his idea, and the Lord used him to introduce this concept to me. And then, of course, I just prayed that God would give me a call. I didn't want to get married, which of course we did, but really wanted my own call. And so he actually is a pastor, and we both were a part of starting Open Door Ministries. He's still the executive director there, and we just celebrated our 20th anniversary these last couple of months of Open Door Ministries. And Open Door Ministries is the Community Development Corporation, or the non-profit fellowship. Is, like I had mentioned, a small multicultural, predominantly homeless or formerly homeless church in the heart of Denver's downtown. It's been around for about 30 years, and 20 years ago we started Open Door Ministries, and so he directs that, and we have a very large staff, about 45 staff, and $2 million budget, and a lot of different, I think there's 13 programs that work around community development for the poor. So yeah, David is all in. I'm not doing this by myself. He's really a champion for emptying himself of privilege and walking and sharing a very sincere journey. And it's really a privilege to be married to such a great leader, and the two of us share this life wholeheartedly together.
Well, it's a wonderful testimony to a cord of three strands not being easily broken. Can two walk together lest they be in agreement? This is the vision that the scriptures give us of harmony in marriage and prospering even in this environment that you're in, where there is humanity, where there is real life. Not insulated, it's an uninsulated life. It's raw, it changes daily. And I'm sure that from a ministry perspective that it's probably crisis management, sometimes being as reactive as you are proactive, and in an ever-changing landscape of challenges and opportunities.
Yeah, it's definitely dynamic. I think that's very true in the sense that it's always changing. But I think one of the challenges is that when you are poor and you work with the poor, you choose to not have the resources of the dominant church. I mean, I'm not saying that there aren't gifts, but it's almost like you eat the scraps of the table. And when you have resources, you can hide things. And the reason when you are in a life like this, it may look more raw is because there's no money to cover it up. There's no ability and energy. When you're in survival at different levels, you can't keep a plastered face, or you can't keep a wall up. There's no resources to do that. And so it's a vulnerable place. And, of course, that leaves you susceptible to being judged or, run over or those kinds of things. So you give up, when you don't have money, you give up any illusions of strength and having it together. So I do believe we are all broken. Some of us have more resources to hide it. And that is true when you are poor and when you choose a life of downward mobility, you lose the ability to hide your brokenness. That's one thing. Another thing is you give up your power, and that's what I talk about with privilege. It's not just living in a community and bearing witness. You have to do something with what you see. This isn't a social experiment. These are people's lives. And when you come from a resourced place and you're trying to share a journey sincerely, you have to not only ask, what are you going to do with what you know, but what are you going to do with what you have? And when you spend your life in a scenario like this, you also give up the ability to have the power and the influence. I mean, people are not chasing David and me down. We're constantly trying to put the poor on other people's radar. And if people will give us, favor, then maybe we can work together. And so I think part of it is you leave mainstream Christianity even, and you leave, sort of the movers and shakers of some of those institutions, and that's fine, but that's some of the stress too. So yes, looking from the outside in, we look so incredibly broken and we look so powerless. And that's what I'm trying to do, is really invite people to share that in relationships, so that we all can realize that the facade of wholeness is truly a facade, and the resources of the kingdom are not supposed to be isolated to certain people, but it should be shared.
Well, that's what the Great Commission is all about. It's not the Great Omission. There's not people
That's right.
groups that are left out of this. Jesus talked about feeding whatever you do to the least of my brothers and sisters, you do to me.
Matthew 25, exactly. I mean, I don't know. Since I live in this world, this is the world that I live in. But my sense, of course, is that this is so obscure and so strange. When, like I said, I think it should be more common. And I don't know if even you have some of those kind of thoughts of weighing in on, what the church and the institution, and their attitudes towards the poor, is it a tithe of time, or is it a focus? And so I'm hoping to challenge the church in that.
Well, if you're asking my opinion as someone who was a congregational leader, founder of a congregation here in Birmingham and built it, and we were an outreach to the Jewish community. Our focus was, as Paul, for I'm not ashamed of the gospel, for it's the power of God for salvation to all who believe, to the Jew first, then to the Greek. My calling as a Jewish believer and as an ordained Messianic rabbi and minister is to continue that and minister to the lost sheep of the house of Israel first, not better, but first in a particular order, because that's a community that's been untouched around the world. It's really been the great omission. We preach to everybody but the Jews and the Muslims. So, because we don't want to offend and it's difficult. But nevertheless, plowing concrete's plowing concrete, whether or not you're going into the poor and the homeless community, whether or not you're going into the Jewish community, whether or not you're going into the Muslim community, or you're working in the Middle East, or you're working in a foreign country, as I've done many times with traveling with a translator. You have to translate currency, you have to translate language, and the gospel, when the power and the anointing of the Holy Spirit there, translates itself, because they see your countenance, they can see your heart. It's a ministry of compassion, which I don't want to say that the image of the church today is more about appearance and more about success and more about numbers, but not knowing the inner workings and sitting in on the board meetings and really knowing what they do give and who they do support. It has an appearance of that. It has an appearance of prosperity. It has an appearance of an overwhelming. Build a new campus or build a new apartment complex in a torn down neighborhood. Same dollars, different impact. Providing affordable housing or providing another place for another 10,000 to gather to watch on TV somebody preach. You could, it's a matter of priorities. I don't begrudge them of it, but I would question whether or not it's hard to preach the gospel to a hungry person.
Yeah.
Their stomachs growling, they're hungry, they're tired, and they have a hard time focusing. So if you can't put food in their belly, you can't feed their soul. It's an impediment to the gospel. So
sure. I'm sure Maslow's hierarchy of need would totally agree with that psychologically too. Yeah, definitely. I mean, definitely. I think another thing is that you bring up an interesting point. So often we have resources and we have them. We even think we share them, but sometimes they get shared with conditions. Even this idea, well, do we want to put this building, used an example of putting a building, in an under-resourced community versus a resource community, then my question even would be a step farther. Who are you going to trust to manage that building? Is it going to be somebody from the outside, or do you think that this under-resourced community has leaders within it that if they had opportunities and they had access and they had, these beautiful demonstrations, or do they come with, well, we've here and we want to come and tell you how you should use it and who has the power? And some of those things I challenge, maybe in that exact example, but so I'm just kind of using one of your examples, but that's some of what I share in the book too, that we have this, at least I had, and I know that it's shared a lot in the cultures that I've come from, is that we believe that people are poor, and it's their fault, and if they be more like us, they could be more successful. Not recognizing that we were born into opportunities that, yes, of course, we had to work for them, but I live alongside people who work much, much harder than I ever did and are not able to go as far, are not even able to go closely as far, because there are things that keep them from having opportunities and access because they were poor or they are poor.
It's interesting statistically, and we just did a special yesterday on literacy, that the prosperity of a community is directly related to the level of literacy and the reading levels of the population, and that it's the key to all avenues, that 75% of people who are on the welfare rolls have a level 1, level 2 literacy level, with the highest being 5. The level of incarceration, people incarcerated, 75%, reading at a level 1, level 2 level, basically functionally illiterate. That we have 20%, 15 to 20% of our high school graduates that we move out of our school system that we give a diploma to that are functionally illiterate, that they can't pass a written test in order to go get a good job. So we have people fighting over the minimum wage or the lower end of the spectrum positions in service areas, janitorial, custodial, those kind of opportunities, because there is no requirement for reading or for the cerebral part of the being, which means that you have to work 2 or sometimes 3 jobs in order to make ends meet. You have single parent, absentee father, which is a chronic problem within several different socio and economic communities. So the infrastructure of those communities is not being paid attention to. If we could send people in to read and teach people to read, and
yeah, I think you're kind of hitting on a small little piece of it. I think it goes even bigger than that. You talked about absentee fathers. And I definitely know that there's a lot to be said about that. But if you look at the incarceration rate among people of color versus the white counterparts, you see the difference and the disparity, with 1 in 4 African Americans. And, I think it's actually 1 in 3 African Americans who are incarcerated, 3 or 4, let's just say 1 in 4, that they're going to be incarcerated sometime during their life. And it goes, I think it's 12 and then 12. It's the chances of a white person being incarcerated are so much lower, yet they look at the same crimes. So you go on college campuses where heroin and meth and marijuana are smoked. You go into even like the basements of suburban teens' homes, and the drug use is so high. But those kids will never see an arrest, not even an arrest. And then you have the over-policing of my community, where people are just looking for things to put charges on. And the amount of non-violent drug offenders that are in our prisons are staggering. And then you blame absentee fathers. Okay, well, I understand that, but we are not treating people equally. We say we value family, but yet at the same time we've got incarceration rates for mothers, nonviolent drug offenses, super high, and then you expect kids to, without parents, have reading scores that are really high. I mean, you go back to just even the unstable life of the poor. There's so much moving involved.
Well,
because we're subject to different types of systems.
I can completely agree with you. We're talking with Michelle Ferrigno Warren, author of The Power of Proximity, Moving Beyond Awareness to Action. It's a book that's in the social justice. It is an inspiring text for really a call for you to check yourself as to, are you close where you can make a change? Or are you far away, consumed by the world you live in, that you have forgotten the very basic teachings of Jesus, that he went to the other side, that he stepped out of his comfort zone. He talked to the Samaritan woman, this concept of him talking with the centurion, a Gentile, a Samaritan, a half-breed, if you will, of those times. And that's who he spoke to. He dined with the tax collectors. This is a challenge for each one of you to embrace this call to walk where Messiah walked. I'm not talking about the land of Israel. I'm talking about the path to those who are less privileged, those who have needs. The power of proximity. The life you change might be your very own. We're going to take a short break, and we'll be right back with Michelle Warren, author of The Power of Proximity. We'll be right back. Shalom. I'm the Reverend Rabbi Eric Walker, Executive Director of Igniting a Nation and host of the daily TV program Revealing the Truth, seen live every Monday through Friday from 9 a.m. to 1 p.m. Central Standard Time at www.ianbn.com, and then replayed throughout the day and night via our website. All of our segments can be seen on the Igniting a Nation YouTube channel. Since our launch in January of this year, we've expanded our global reach to over 54 countries with a social media following of over 125,000. Our commitment is to bring you the most in-depth interviews with authors, subject matter experts, and thought leaders from around the world. We have interviewed guests from Israel, Brazil, England, India, and all across North America. All of our authors are featured on the Books and Media page on our website, www.ianbn.com. There you can find a direct link to the book you want to order, and we receive a small commission directly from Amazon. There is no cost to you for this service. In addition to our daily teachings and interviews, we make available to you the archive of all of the interviews on our YouTube, Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram channels. Our live program is available from our homepage, and there is never a charge to you for any of this access. We made the decision long ago that we would remain a commercial-free resource that would not be influenced by any pressure from any outside company. There are only two ways that we are able to continue to operate this ministry and provide you with the only live 4-hour daily Christian television talk show program. The first is through your support and tax-deductible contributions to Igniting a Nation. These can be made directly through the donate button on the website or sent through the mail to Igniting a Nation, 2700 Corporate Drive, Suite 120, Birmingham, Alabama, 35242. The other way we support the program is by offering you a unique opportunity to have access to over 10 years worth of teachings on a subscription basis. The teaching archives contains all of my prior sermons, Torah studies, prophecy in the news videos, and much more for the low subscription price of $5 per month. This subscription grants you unlimited access to over 800 hours of content not available elsewhere and is updated weekly with the most current prophecy classes. In addition to 20 hours of original TV programming each weekday, we invite you to join us live every Monday, Tuesday, and Thursday evenings for our Prophecy in the News classes. The times and locations are listed on our events page on the website www.ianbn.com. Every day, you and I are faced with the challenge of where we will go to hear the truth. We are committed to bring you the only program of its kind that covers the headlines, the heartlines, and biblical truth. We cannot do this without your support. Since we launched on January 5th, 2017, we have aired over 300 individual teachings, interviews, and commentaries not available anywhere else. We are now working side by side with almost every major Christian publishing house to bring you the most in-depth feature interviews possible. Our 1-hour features address every subject that affects the believer's life. We are hearing of salvations from the Middle East, Africa, and all across the United States. Lives are being changed every day, and we have only just begun. Our mission is to become your trusted resource and grant you access to the people, tools, and information you need to grow in your relationship with the Lord. You can help us by liking us on social media and through your financial support. We know you have many choices in who you support, but we are prayerfully asking you to consider helping us keep revealing the truth, true to our calling, to cover the headlines, the heartlines, and biblical truth like no other program available. Donate today and help us bring the message to the four corners of the earth. Visit www.ianbn.com and donate, buy a book, or subscribe to our teaching archives. Without you, we do not exist. Shalom and welcome back to this edition of Revealing the Truth, where we cover the headlines, the heartlines, and biblical truth. I'm your host, the Reverend Rabbi Eric Walker, and today we're visiting with Michelle Ferrigno Warren, the author of the new book from IVP Press, The Power of Proximity, Moving Beyond Awareness to Action. Michelle, welcome back to the program.
Thank you.
You know, this has been somewhat of a challenge for you both physically because of your arthritis, inflammation, pain, that you really have had to become completely transparent. We talk about this mask that people wear, but you can't really get away with wearing a mask in this community you live in, can you?
Absolutely not. I think you shouldn't be able to get rid of a community, rid of a mask when you're living in community with anybody. You know, I think this is a day and age where we are specifically, working very hard to put up our walls. But no, I mean, if you're going to be a good neighbor, you're going to really want to establish yourself in a community, you need to be willing to show yourself. You can't just ask other people to be real, you need to be real as well.
That's such a struggle for a lot of people. They have an image that they're trying to conform to, and it's not the Messiah. They have an ideal that they have cast for themselves, and they feel like the vision that they had for themselves must be divinely inspired, and it requires them to be in a six-figure job with 3 cars and 2.4 children, living in the suburbs of in beautiful Golden, Colorado. But
that sounds nice. That sounds like heaven.
But that's not the calling that's on your and David's life. And what you found, as you share in the book, is you found a depth of relationship, a richness in being or tapping into a community and feeling their pain, walking in their footsteps, wearing their shoes, understanding their plight, and trying to equip them spiritually and physically for the challenges that lie ahead to try to address the issues of the inner city, not necessarily to get people out.
You're right. You're right. Definitely. I think that the idea that we would have to rescue people out kind of plays into that Western exceptionalism narrative that we are the white saviors coming in to rescue the poor, or rescue the people of color, as though our way of life and the way we've approached life is not only better and superior, but something that others should try to attain to. And so that's a very false narrative. I think one thing before I go a little bit farther about my heart for reconciliation is just recognizing that I don't think I can fix a problem I don't understand. And I don't think other people can either. I'm not poor, and I'm not homeless, and I'm not an immigrant. I'm not hungry, all of those kinds of things. And so why in the world would I think I could fix a problem that I truly don't understand? I think people who are homeless, people who are incarcerated, or who were, they are the better leaders or voices of those problems, and together we need to work on those. So I think, I can only get so close. I can't really put my feet in their shoes. I can live alongside them and listen and share and care about what they care about, but it's really their unique place in the world. And often people like me look from a posture of, almost judgment. And that is what I'm calling against, is I can't be in your shoes, but let me at least walk alongside you so I can better understand. And it goes back to what I would like to say, is that I have a heart for reconciliation. This is not a heart because I'm so good or noble. This is God's heart. God's heart is one for reconciliation. He came so that we could be reconciled to him, but as important, he came so we can be reconciled to each other. We live in the church age in a post-Pentecost narrative, but we are staying slaves to a post-fall, pre-Pentecost narrative, where we are in our isolated languages, where we're in our isolated cultures, and where we believe a lie that says we cannot be one. And we are content with that divide. And what I'm trying to do is provoke us as the church to realize that Pentecost has come and we are living in it. And the Holy Spirit's work, we need to allow it to work so that we truly can be reconciled. And we will not be reconciled if those of us with privilege and power not only think we're better than other people, but that we come in a posture of deliverance versus in a relationship, so that together we can learn and allow each one of us to use our gifts, our abilities that are God-given and God-ordained to reconcile with each other.
I've been the largest proponent of the last paragraph of Acts chapter 2 being the model for what it is we're called to do. And everybody says, well, yes, we do that. I said, do you really sell what you have and take care of another? Can you really say that this community you serve is lacking for nothing? This is what they did. They weren't large. They didn't have 44,000 that they were reporting as their Sunday attendance. They were a small group, 10, 12, maybe 14 families, which is all they could handle. And it says they had fellowship together, they broke bread together, they prayed for one another, they sold what they had, taking care of each other. If they had to something, they gave one to the other, that they had everything in common. And God added to their numbers daily those being saved. Where did we get this idea, and when did this concept of the mega come into play, and all of a sudden the multi-campus and the high excitement and the high entertainment factor, and there's more on stage from an equipment standpoint than you might have an entire building earn in a year that's been invested hundreds upon hundreds of thousands of dollars in entertainment.
Yeah. No, I think that's a real grief in the church. I think, I think we can justify the way we live and the way we spend. And I hope that not just this book, but that Christians, that the Holy Spirit would continue to stir our hearts to recognize that we're no different from the world if all we're trying to do is compete with a bigger and better and more snazzy image. But really it is about meeting the needs of people. So going back to the Acts church, the Acts church was known for its radical love for the poor. You even see Paul rather, a little bit down the journey, from those initial Acts 2 time, saying, don't forget the poor, and you were eager to remember them. That was something that society wasn't doing, and the church was known for that. I don't believe the church is known for caring for the poor, and I would not say it's negative to have 40,000 people coming to church. The question is why are we gathering? And what do we hope that outcome will be? And if it's just, I'm hoping people won't be so self-absorbed and they'll give a little bit of their money to the church, or they'll give a little bit of money to missions, or maybe they'll wear a t-shirt and clean up a neighborhood. We're settling for such a simple response from a radical gospel. Christ did not leave the earth with notoriety that would give him fame and fortune. He was killed, and as a political statement, if you're going to be honest, as a political statement, and died as a criminal. And so that's who we're following. And so anything that, smacks of ego or smacks of building up a big kingdom to ourselves, whether it is an actual, property or assets. I know we need things to be able, we need buildings, and we need, assets that open door, and I'm just so grateful. But we need to be careful. Why do we have them, and for what is the purpose? And I am concerned that we don't use these resources, 24/7. We kind of are afraid that somebody's going to break something or spill something. We're just not generous. We have such a scarcity mentality that this is ours and you can't have it. You may mess it up. And that is human nature, and that is the world, and it has seeped into our churches, and I think it's just killing us, and it's killing our effectiveness.
Michelle, what do you tell the person that's concerned about proximity, about being murdered, raped, robbed, the fear factor that so many people struggle with because it's such an unknown, and they have no exposure, so they take their information from the media?
Fear is a very, it is completely a trap that keeps you in a broken place no matter what you're afraid of. And God hasn't given us a spirit of fear. He's given us a spirit of power and of love and of a sound mind. And living in a community that has a higher crime rate, or, may seem like it's more scary or whatever, I think that's just ridiculous fodder for a distraction of a bigger conversation, which is what is God going to do when you take on his be strong and be courageous and do what I'm calling you to do. I think that's really the bigger question. Not necessarily picking up your whole family and moving, but why aren't you moving? Why aren't we wanting to come in contact with people who have different color skin or have accents? This isn't just a church issue. The United States right now is perpetuating a narrative of fear that says the other is scary, and I need to build very tall walls, and I need to make sure I keep them out. I need to protect myself, and I'm all for protection. I've got locks on my doors, and I'm not stupid. I think that we need to be careful and be sensible. But fear is a basic psychological thing that happens in your brain. It's sometimes based on good stuff, and sometimes it's just based on lies. But that amygdala is getting us in trouble in the church, in our country, etc., that we're just so afraid that we are, that fight or flight, gets all stirred up in the back of our brain. And the only thing that will calm it down is good executive function in the frontal lobe. And I feel as though we as Christians should have all the things we need to do to calm our fears. Our executive function should be filled to the brim with the power of God, with the grace and the sustaining ministry of Jesus and the gospel. I mean, we should not be chronically afraid. We should be, that executive function should calm us down. And then on top of it, there's just a lot of good things out there. I mean, we should not be trusting in the media, not because of the fake news versus, that's just ridiculous in itself. But I think we need to be better thinkers, and we need to allow our emotions to calm down, to make some sense of that executive function, and to be stewards of knowledge that is out there, and try to be, and not just let things fester, I guess is all I'm saying.
It's so interesting as you're talking, I'm thinking, how many people have honored and paid tribute to Mother Teresa? And what a role model, and what an amazing person. But yet it never occurs to them that they could be like Mother Teresa.
What about Dietrich Bonhoeffer or Corrie ten Boom? I mean, my whole childhood was the hiding place. That was, we kept hearing about how noble and wonderful that this, family would hide Jewish asylees, in under floorboards and break laws because the laws were unjust, and we all think that at some time that if a Corrie ten Boom or a Dietrich Bonhoeffer is needed, that we're going to somehow be that person. But it doesn't just happen overnight. I mean, it comes through decisions, and I'm afraid that we aren't. I mean, we're just so afraid that and then we hide behind, well, this is the law, as though the law is the top of the food chain for how we respond. And that's not true. I mean, I talk a lot about justice is above the law, that we as Christians, we answer to a higher moral calling. And that's why a Dietrich Bonhoeffer, and that's why a Corrie ten Boom. And there's times that we're asked to either at least challenge the law, and not be content with the injustice of the law. The problem is, and this is why proximity to the poor has been powerful for me and for other people who have chosen my life, is that we begin to realize the law is broken. Very first sentence in my book, if you wake up in the morning and the system works for you, you think it's a good system. If I had not left my community, I would have always thought that it was a good system. But I've had to wake up in this community for 24 years, and I realize it's very broken. And I don't want people to take my word for it. I want you to hear, I want you to listen, maybe share that, and realize that a broken law has no right to stay, especially in a democracy. If we are proud of our ability to change laws, that we need to use our voice and what we have, which is our privilege, to make sure that we're changing laws that are broken and unjust, because justice is important.
The idea of social justice, which is really at the very core of community development, the core of representation, giving a voice to those that have no voice, giving a presence to those who have no presence, that they are statistics, they are categorized, undocumented this and on this, and really labeled to the point where they have no choice but to live down to the expectations of society. It's the marketing of hopelessness that is quite disturbing. We tell our children you can be anything you want to be, but that's not really true. You can be anything that God has gifted you to be. I can't be an NFL player.
Other people have given you permission and opportunity to be those people. I mean, I think the Lord has given people gifts and opportunities and calls them out to do it. And sometimes we even see miracles where doors open. But I think that that's some of the systemic nature of sin, is that people are stuck, not because God would will it that way and nothing can be changed, but we have an opportunity to help them become unstuck. Not because we are so noble and so great, but when God shows us the brokenness of things and we have the opportunity to alleviate that, I mean, we have to do that. Social justice gets such a bad rap, and I know in my upbringing coming out of fundamentalism and being a white evangelical, I had heard so much about the social gospel and the watering down of theology. I mean, that was kind of what the reaction of the fundamentalist movement, which I of course was a part of children Christian schools, and that was just kind of the ethos of what I heard growing up. And so it's kind of ironic and also beautiful that I would be spending a couple decades alongside social justice ministry, because social justice isn't the social gospel. Social justice is the gospel. I get frustrated that justice is a trigger word, especially for pastors. I mean, no, justice is a biblical word. It is the very essence of restoring what was broken. Justice and flourishing and shalom. I mean, these are words that in evangelical settings, which is where I come from, that people stay away from because they're so afraid they're going to trigger or upset, whether it's the old guard around the social gospel or the newer guard that they're going down the way of liberals. I mean, there's so many different fears and worries, but what we do is we miss the opportunity to join God in His redemptive justice work that He's doing, and so I really hope that some of it can be just a clarification of terms and a re-inviting back of the idea of justice. It is throughout all the Scripture, from beginning to end. You see God's heart for justice. Even the psalmist refers that justice and righteousness are the foundations of God's throne. I mean, they're putting that metaphor that God cares so much about wholeness, the community and wholeness. And I love that you are a rabbi and understand the law and just the whole principle of the reset of Jubilee. I mean, when you look at the law and the beauty of God understanding that people fall into situations, things happen, but that every 70 or every 50 years there would be a reset, that the land that was distributed needed to go back to the original owners because things happen. Sometimes it's because of personal choices, but sometimes, people get cancer. My neighbor got cancer, a brain tumor. He lost his house. He was an immigrant from Mexico. He's worked two jobs, from the moment he got here. His wife worked 2 jobs, and that was really a shame. He didn't have insurance. So things happen. And so God's heart for justice for the poor, for the widow, the orphan, for the immigrant, but even for people who were born into privilege and then lost it, that reset, we have lost that narrative in the church, and we almost shun it. And when we push down this idea of justice or even social justice, I feel like we're closing up the door that God wants to keep open so that people can be restored to wholeness, whole communities.
Do you and David have peace?
Yeah. Peace, P-E-A-C-E.
Mm-hmm.
Shalom, yes.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Good, because because this is the core underlying message of proximity. That there's people that struggle to conform with every standard in the world and have no peace. But here you have shed the trappings of the world to be in proximity. And proximity means you're in amongst them. You are living in the community. You're not on the outskirts, you're in the community. And this is where you found your peace. For those that are longing for a peace, it's not going to be found in a new car, it's not going to be found in a new house, it's going to be found when you die to yourself and you find out that there are lives that you can impact, change that you can affect.
Your life is the one that can be the most impacted. I mean, Jesus, rereading the Gospels over and over again, I don't know how anybody can believe that moth and rust isn't going to grow. I mean, we aren't building to a kingdom here. We're to be building a kingdom, God's kingdom, Christ's kingdom, the kingdom that He is establishing, here on earth. And like I said, this should not be radical. This should not be strange or foreign. And I agree with you. We as Christians have sold our peace to a lie that this world is what we have, or the lie that we can't make an impact. So there are people who are definitely, think they're living for this moment and they're fine, and I've had even several people who are close to me saying, I know you're going to have a mansion, I don't care, in heaven. And so that's fine. That's an interesting narrative. But then there are people that love the Lord and are literally afraid of the world. and they have, siloed themselves up in the church, and they are literally hunkering down, waiting for Christ to come back. And I'm hoping that this will help them too. This isn't just let's wait it out and try to create a little bit of heaven on earth. Lord, we are commanded to be in the world. In the world. And God, in the Old Testament, everybody wants their child to be Daniel or Esther or Naaman's servant or Shadrach or Meshach or Ben. They were all refined in pagan environments as children. And when I realized that everybody wants their kid to be this amazing, patriarch of our faith, that would be like so wonderful that in and out of season, whether you're going to be burned up or not, you'll get thrown in a lion's den or not, you are going to stand for truth. All of those kids did that, and as into adults, in paganism, in the world, not bunkering down. I mean, we even see that in some of the prophets, kind of like, be careful. You have been sent as this remnant living in Babylon. Live, have kids, plant gardens, be a part of the world. Don't be in it. Don't be of it.
That's exactly right. We've been
when
talking, Michelle, unfortunately, we're out of time for this segment. But I want to encourage our audience. Do you see the passion? 24 years of living in the inner city in proximity to the very ministry, not commuting in and driving back to the suburbs at night, but living in proximity so that as life happens, they're a part of that life that happens. There is power in proximity, as she shares in this new book, The Power of Proximity, Moving Beyond Awareness to Action. Michelle Warren, go to the Books and Media page at ignitinganation.com right now and click on this book, blue cover, The Power of Proximity, and get a copy for yourself. Maybe this is the call you needed. Maybe this was the message you needed to get you out of your comfort zone to see where God is calling you next. The Power of Proximity. Michelle, thank you so much for being with us here on Revealing the Truth.
Thank you so much.
God bless you. We're going to take a short break, and when we come back, we'll bring you the next edition of Revealing the Truth.